Hey guys, so this video we're going to do a little bit more sci-fi design, and I got a question that came in. Somebody was asking, how can you get away from some of the basic primitive shapes, circles, squares, cubes, rectangles, spheres, cylinders, and all that fun stuff? And truthfully, when you're creating things, you probably won't, but they're just like variations of that. When you take a shape like this, for example, and you start looking at it, it's really just kind of a rectangle with a rounded edge, perhaps rounded. And so organic things in general, like, take, like, the idea of a spinal piece here from, like, a cow or whatever. They do things like this. They're not really all that complicated. And so, when you're breaking things down, organics anyways, you need to do form studies on this, and you'll find that a lot of times you have, like, something that's more triangular in nature, it turns into something more like an oval. And, of course, this here is kinda representing, like, a cow horn or something like that perhaps, right? Or buffalo. And so this stuff happens all the time where organics are very kind of smushy shapes. They're generally the same basic primitives, but they just are slightly varied quite a bit. So, of course, you can do more complex things than that. But in general, when you're trying to come up with designs or concepts, there's a bunch of different ways you can approach doing this. There's all kinds of different techniques and workflows, perhaps. Someone might start in traditional and just actually glue like model pieces together, perhaps, and kit bash that way. But there's also the chance that they're doing just 2D sketching, 2D painting, digital 2D painting, traditional, whatever. And maybe they're actually using real clay with 3D printed parts, using CAD software. That's something like automotive designers will do. So when you're trying to create more interesting kind of sci-fi designs, the technique that you use to get to that end result's really up to you. I mean, if you want to glue things together and take photographs of it later on and do a matte painting over that, you could do that. That's something you can possibly go for. But we're going to go with a tried and true technique here instead, which is something that a lot of concept artists utilize where they do the silhouettes first, right? And so there's different ways you can go about doing this as well. But main thing here is I'm going to use the default Krita brushes here under the digital section. We're going to use the marker first. I want to modify this real quick. It has density 80%. We're going to turn it to the max. We're going to turn it into a square. And we're going to start with that. Turn the pressure sensitivity off for the flow and the opacity. And then we're going to turn on pressure sensitive size, but we're going to make it something like 25 to 50% somewhere in there, maybe. And that way we can use black on a new layer and we can just start creating silhouettes like this. And you can see this works really good for hard surface shapes, but you can do more kind of modern organic kind of designs with it as well. Now you can mix this up by changing the square to a triangle or back to a circle perhaps. But you can create really interesting kind of designs like this really fast without even really thinking about it, just kind of doodling and sketching with them, doing little thumbnails like this. And so you can fill a whole document here with tons of different variations very fast. And don't forget to erase things too, because you get more interesting stuff going on perhaps when you start doing things like this. And you can just play around with the ideas there and see what you end up with. And maybe you like them, maybe you don't. Who knows? But you won't know until you try it. So explore the big silhouette forms very fast because you can do really cool stuff very quickly with it, right? Round out some edges perhaps. And you can see where the square brush kind of makes that a little bit harder. So you might want to try using a round brush instead. But if you do have the rotation on, like it does by default, you can also try turning that off because sometimes that makes that a little bit harder to control in some ways when your edge is changing a little bit. But you can see we're getting some result out of that anyway. So basically, thumbnail a lot, have fun with this. Now, there's two options you have to go from here, kind of. You could just keep going with this in general and having a lot of fun with it. Drop the opacity layer, and then go to a new layer, and then use some kind of sketching brush. You can use a hard round brush and set the size a little bit lower because it's usually big by default. You could use a hard round brush with pressure sensitive opacity. If you want to try to feather things in a little bit more, you can do that. But you can just use this default one here, which works out quite nice. But it's like a little square brush, basically a rectangle. And you can change the size of that as needed as well. And so this is gonna behave something kinda like a more like a pencil, I would say. But you can start breaking up these shapes and coming up with designs on them really fast and just figuring out like different kind of forms you're seeing here. So you're creating compound shapes basically off of this very basic silhouette. And you could do this super fast, obviously. and start saying like, maybe I like this here, maybe I don't, maybe I want to change something, and start playing around with these ideas and add in your details if you want, triangles and things like that, and just getting it going basically, right? And so later on, you would do probably, well, we already have the layer underneath it with the silhouette, so you could do a layer on top of that, alpha lock it, and you'll see it has no effect here until you put these two in a group. So we hit Control G, put those two in a group. Now this one's alpha lock. This will act like a mask below it. It has to be at 100% though. This is a little bit of a problem because we can't see our lines no more, right? So we create another layer, alpha lock it, use the marker or the blocker brush if you want, and you just turn it gray perhaps, maybe like a light gray. You'll see that this is also alpha locked. And so we could just refill it basically super fast. We can go back to the sketcher and we could keep working on this perhaps and keep sketching on it, but we can also create another layer on top of it. What we can do is we could save this blocking brush, save brush as a new preset. And a little pro tip here, if you underscore first, it'll go to the top of the list, and then name it whatever you want. So you'll always know where that thing is. You don't get lost in all the brushes here. And then you can actually reset this thing later on, right? Like you just reset it real quick. And so you can keep using it the way it comes by default and not worry about it too much. And you can see here, we can put this new layer below, and alpha lock it so that way we don't replace our lines perhaps if we want to keep our lines anyways. We can do that. Oop, put it below the lines. It was already below the lines anyways. So we alpha lock it and we can now start doing this. You can also add colors to it if you wanted to. But you might want to do the shading first. Some guys like to do the shading first. I personally like just going straight to color, but that's my own preference. Not necessarily the best way of doing things anyways. But you can start working this very quickly. You could do another layer, for example, change it to color, alpha lock it. You see where this is starting to go. So Krita is really good for this. Um, and it's not really that bad of a process in general. Like if you want to start trying to add some different variations in colors or whatever, there you go. You have that now. You can always go back. You can name these. You can say like this is color, and then this one was the shading. Okay, and then this was the initial gray fill. Just keep things organized so you don't have to wonder which layer you're clicking on, perhaps, and keep track if you're on the right layer when you're working. I think everybody's run into that problem before, working on the wrong layer. And you could say like that's the top line art there, maybe. And then so, we can just go between these as needed. We'll work on the shading, we can still do that. So here's a fun little tip about this is if you're going to, you can use like the little airbrush here. It's really a soft round brush that's pressure sensitive opacity. It's not really an airbrush, in my opinion. That's a little hard to utilize as an airbrush, anyways. But you can still use it for shading, and try to work out some shading in here, perhaps. Probably don't want to go to pure black. You might want to just stay a little bit short of pure black. So that way you can still see visual information in there at least. It doesn't um, get rid of all of it. But you can shade this whole thing as well very fast. You can work back and forth. Same goes for lights. You might want to just take it close to white, but not quite all the way. And this is where having this color selector a lot bigger can help, but also this specific color selector, you can just dial in anything right here if you want. So if you want it like 90%, there you go. You got 90% now. So we can spend a good amount of time here just trying to shade this thing in this manner and getting everything working just right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back a little bit and kind of do this all over again. But basically, I'm going to delete everything except for the silhouettes, which apparently I'm going to bring outside that group. Otherwise, it deletes it apparently. So we'll delete everything now. We'll get rid of that paint layer. I don't know what's on that, but um, all right, so we got the silhouettes back. Now here's where it gets really fun because we're going to Control Shift G. That's going to create a quick clipping group. It's already got a new layer here. They call it a mask layer for some reason, but the silhouette is really the mask. And so this is going to be a paint layer more or less. You could say this is going to be shading. You could rename it if you want. It's alpha locked. You can use that marker. You could go to town in here, just trying to use different grays to try to get this all looking more interesting. So we're just going, instead of doing gray fills and line art right away, we're just going to go ahead and just do the shading first and work with the tones and the breakup of these things, perhaps. You could try to do them all in a batch together. Remember, you could do a whole sheet of this stuff very fast. So um, you're going to pick like your 5 best, the ones you find the most interesting, perhaps, and or maybe you could do a dozen even, but you're going to work on those ones specifically because it's going to take a lot. Well, not a lot longer, but it's going to slow down at this point. where you're gonna wanna take your time just trying to figure out, where you're placing your lines, your panels, and all that other fun stuff, to get some kind of sort of interesting shapes and designs going anyways. Now you can modify the silhouette because keep in mind, we're working outside these areas, right? So if you have to modify the silhouette, you go back to that base layer there, use something like a hard round brush or that marker if you still have it, the square one. And you can press E and erase, or you could press or you could just draw back in solid black. And you'll see as long as you're well, you won't always have it work out this way, but a lot of times the shading continues on past where the silhouette is. So you can just kind of modify the silhouette and add additional details perhaps if you wanted to. You can see like right here, we didn't quite get out to that area, so it's all black still. But I think you get the idea. We can change the silhouette. We can go back to the shading now. We can use a marker. And we can do some rather bold kind of lines here if we wanted to. We could also use this round brush and make it a little bit bigger. And you'll see this is what we also get with this one. So if we want to do like big strips like this super fast, we can do that. And this is going to take some practice to do, right? And you still have to keep in mind that you need to, maybe do some form studies on hard surface shapes and organic shapes as well. Like study a cow, study some sea life, sea creatures, study bugs, study, like the different forms of different things. And that'll help you kind of pull out detail here a little bit as well when you're doing your basic overall forms. And if you haven't done those form studies, use reference images quite heavily. You should be kind of looking at those things about as much as you're looking at your references, anyways. Looking at them about as much as you look at your own drawings. So that way you're kind of mimicking what's going on there. Now, what we're going to be doing is mixing this up with photo bashing. So we're just going to use a photo texture to kind of add more detail to these things as opposed to trying to do it all by hand. It's kind of a little concept artist trick that where you don't if you can speed up the process, you can speed up the process, but you can also have a little bit more fun with it by just playing around with the ideas of whatever happens kind of randomly there. You can get some interesting ideas to work off of, and of course, you could do that as part of a process too. Like you can do it as a step, so that means like later on, you do that as just a simple step to the process. You could sketch over whatever you create here and then redraw it and redo the whole thing if you wanted to into a different kind of shape or form possibly. But it'd be probably better just to kind of keep what you have going and so that way you don't go around redoing things all the time. But you definitely could do that if you wanted to. Use it as an original, use it as your new inspiration for the next iteration of the project. Remember, what you're trying to do is rapidly iterate things, and ultimately that's what's going to work out. You notice I'm using black here. It's not going to stay black for the most part. You'll see what happens here in just a second, but um, basically, that's what I'm gonna have to do a little bit different down here. Whoop, wait, what did I do? Am I using gray? Yeah, color sample. Okay, so I want to knock all that down. A little bit darker down there. All right. So if you make things too dark, the photo bashing part becomes a little bit troublesome. But if you go ahead and use this blender tool here, by default, this thing is too strong. It smudges way too much. All right. Um, it's a blur smudger is what it is. Turn it down to like 20, 30% opacity, and it's going to tend to blend a little bit more, especially if you use light pressure on your tablet or your pen there. So you can actually go through this and you can kind of soften some things if you wanted to. You could turn it down even more if you wanted as well, and just keep using it lightly. It's very sensitive. Like you could take it down to like 1% if you use it heavy. It's going to be. You can see how that works out, right? Like you can go back and forth on it a little bit at least. And so this is quite nice, except we don't have a lot of shading going on yet. That's really definitive, like of any. Like we got some ideas of what might become secondary forms and shapes. Now you could keep working this until it's a little bit more the way you want it to be, but that's going to be kind of optional if you want to do that. I would recommend actually kind of doing it because it's really ultimately what you're wanting to create first, and not so much about what just comes from the photograph. But you certainly can skip that step if you wanted and use the photograph to kind of quickly get more secondary and tertiary type details going pretty much by accident. And when you photo bash something, you should be using like specific little pieces of photos, kind of laying them all on here in kind of these complex little ways, perhaps, so that way you can really just focus on the design. But if you want to just see like what would happen if you lay like a whole thing on top of it, that works as well, which is what we're going to do. Right. And so I just want to try to get some of this stuff brighter here, perhaps. Um, and so we're going to try that with some textures I have. So I have a folder with a bunch of just like jet engines and stuff in it. And so I'm going to take one of these images and drag it over here and insert it as a layer. But I want to take maybe I really like well, some of these are in perspective, and so they're not so good for this like side orthographic stuff, but um, I could use it maybe on a I could straighten it out potentially, I guess, but I don't really want to do that. So I'm gonna try this one first. We're gonna insert this as a new layer. Okay, you can see it's a very big image. Little pro tip here: when you hit T to do the transform on this thing is going to get really slow, generally speaking. I think it might be before you hit T actually, or somewhere in here it does it. Maybe I don't see it. I don't see it right now. So hit T and then Control T. Okay, there it is. You see the preview type? There's accurate with instant preview, and then there's fast and accurate. Fast tends to work out a lot better. It's much more responsive. So just try that out and scale this thing around. Place it on top here. You could, have these with a or have this with a lower opacity, perhaps, just to kind of see through it. Perhaps I think it does that by default too. You can kind of see through a little bit. So pick like which section on this you might want to utilize. Sometimes leaving it a little bit larger might also be useful. So you can kind of move it around and see like maybe what it might look like with different things. So we're going to press enter. And now this here, guess what we can do with this? First of all, we're going to rotate it because it looks like the light is coming more from the top. I guess so. We'll rotate it around then. First, press enter. And I mean, it's got 2 lights on it anyways, but so what we're gonna do is, you can alpha lock it, bam, you see? And so that's really cool because now we got a bunch of, like, weird big details in here now. It may be a little bit too large, that image, we might wanna scale it smaller. But we could certainly take this and set it to something like multiply or overlay. We try different blending methods if we want. Multiply tends to work out pretty well, but you'll notice that, like, when we're looking at this right now, it's very dark. So this image was very dark to begin with. We're gonna turn off that alpha lock real quick, turn it back to normal. There might be other things you wanna do to this to try to remove some of that darkness, perhaps. We're gonna try it. I don't know if it's gonna work out too well, but we'll duplicate it, the layer, okay? Whoop, no, not the whole group, just the layer. If we can get it to duplicate. Let's hit Control J. Is that duplicate? Okay, it did duplicate it. All right, so this layer here, what we're gonna try doing is doing Control Shift and U, desaturating the layer. Hopefully it doesn't do the whole image. Yeah, okay. We can hit Control I and invert it. And now we're going to scroll through these. I forgot which blend mode it is, but it's one of these, and it tries to remove lighting basically. And I don't want to remove it completely, but I don't want it to be so dramatic here. So we're going to try to get back to just the base textures. It might be overlay. It looks like overlay is kind of doing it, right? Yeah. We'll go back to overlay if we think it seems fit. Soft light might do it as well because it's soft light's technically like a overlay light, basically, is what it is. Okay, or multiply. No. All right, yeah, we'll do overlay then. It seemed like the right option there for the most part. And I do want some shadow, but not as much as we had, right? This is going to cause a little bit of a weird effect on it, perhaps. But basically, we'll take this now and we can just press Control E, alpha lock it. Hopefully, it'll work out a little bit better. And so having the right images obviously also goes a very long way. And because I think it's a little too large with those pieces in there, we're going to try just bringing it down. Whatever we get here is probably what we're going to get. So, and let's do a multiply again, or we could do an overlay. Oh, nope, not overlay in this case. Sorry. Multiply it is. All right, yeah, very dark. All right, so I'm going to drop the opacity just a bit so I can see kind of what's going on underneath it a little bit. This should be a little bit brighter, I would think, but it doesn't really seem to be the case. Okay, so let's go to the shading. And so a little trick about this is, and this is often something I do anyways. They usually come in kind of dark anyways, but this is a little much for myself. When you go to the shading section here and use something like the airbrush, use pure white for just a moment. Let's see how bright it actually does get. Okay. Yeah, it's not very bright. I would say we got a little bit of a balance issue here. So, but you can do the shading underneath this thing, generally speaking. So before we go to that step, what we're going to do is just, I want to turn it back to normal real quick. And I want to go ahead and just brighten all this up. So we're going to do filter, adjust, and we could do levels or brightness and contrast, whatever the case here. And I just want to brighten it really. I think that's my best bet at this point, and maybe even overexpose it a little. It probably wouldn't hurt. I just want to get it lighter. So when it multiplies over it, it's not as bad anyways. So when we multiply now, alpha lock it. Yeah, it's still very dark, huh? Let's do it with the settings on here. So we'll do that one more time and see how bright we can actually get this going before it just looks completely blown out. I don't think I can adjust that much more. Maybe just this one, the middle slider there. All right. Looks like we got a little bit of the background here on the top one. Whoops. I don't want that, but oh, that's just depth of field on the camera, I guess. Okay, so a little center section might work out better. You can see this is a little rough. This is it's pushing it a little bit much, but we could try to find something we like in here still. Maybe we still have to kind of line things up a little bit better, and we can kind of shift it around and see if any of this stuff is going to work for us. And I think that's ultimately kind of okay there. If we just wanted some generic kind of texture, we could do that. Um, Not too bad, but I do like these kinda tubes running through it. I don't know, it seems kinda interesting. You can also try doing, like, warps and things like that if it helps, but, this case, I'm just gonna do a more rotation and see what we get. These ones are kinda way off over here. We could just use it as, like, text patterns or something like that, perhaps. Alright, and so, yeah, I think we can roll with that. Let's see. How much are we missing from that? From it being so dark? Yeah, maybe we can go a little bit lighter with it. Yeah, so there's a little tweaking involved with this one apparently, but it's not too bad. Some of the other textures would have probably worked out better that are better lit perhaps. Actually, let's try one real quick. We'll try this one as a new layer. It's a lot of it's a lot brighter in this area, so let's see. We'll see how this one goes. We'll make it just smaller and throw it in there. You can see how fast this is of to try just different variations. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You know, maybe change this one to multiply. Notice that multiply though does remove all like the specular highlights and stuff like that. And normally you would use this on an individual object that you're working on. You wouldn't do them across all of them, perhaps like this, but you know, for simplicity's sake, we're just doing them on all of them at the moment. You can see, yep, this one's a little bit more interesting, I would say. So if we were to utilize this one, that's a possibility as opposed to this one. We'll go with the one we just did. But you can play around with these things and try to figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work for you, basically. I'm just going to shift it around a bit, maybe get some get some things in here going. Yeah, let's do that one then. All right, cool. So we can go back over the shading now, potentially. I'm going to brighten this one as well, just a little bit. Okay, and then there we go. So we now can go back to the shading. We can use the markers. We can use the smudger. We can do all kinds of stuff in here. We have some stuff going on now. We can play around with the silhouette as well. Like if we want to go ahead and say like, this looks pretty cool, but I want to just cut here, and then bring it back out this way. You can change that silhouette up to match kind of the texture underneath now. So that's a possibility as well. So and that's what's great about this technique. It's very forgiving in a lot of ways, right? Like if I want to just chop that off, no problems. And maybe I work that out a little bit. Maybe I change this here a little bit. This isn't really a good brush for this, I think. It feels a little bit off, but it's something you could consider doing at least now. And playing around with it a lot, right? So there you go. Anything about that texture that you don't like as well, you can use the clone stamp tool for it. Clone stamp by default is a round brush. You want to use a different brush tip, set it to predefine. I use the rock one quite a bit personally, but there's other ones in here you can try as well, just grungy type of brushes perhaps. And so if I can find mine, the one I usually use anyways, it's like a triangle version as well, which might be actually kind of interesting. Let's try that out, see what it does. We'll make it smaller. We control click. We can do samples in areas. So we can kind of steal this texture and just, move it over. And it should be going off the layer. So even if you can't see what you're cloning, you should still be able to use it potentially. You can see right there, it's still working, right? And so we can fix and repair things as well if we wanted to. And maybe we don't like what's going on there. So we just kind of work it out perhaps. See what I'm saying? All right, cool. So we can do all kinds of photo editing tricks if we need to. That's the basic idea anyway. So um, I don't know why that one's so dark right there, but it is. All right. With that out of the way, this is still very blurry for some reason, but we can fix that manually. So here's the thing. We have the image in, we have the shading. Let's deal with the shading now. We went over the clone stamp. We're good. I'm going to use this little sketcher because the shading, we're starting to like key in on the shading. Usually you work large to small. But now we're able to go through these areas perhaps, and we can use pure white, pure black if we wanted, and then we might hit it with a really small blur on it as well, just to kind of work it back a little bit. So maybe it'll turn a little bit more gray or whatever. If you're going for really stylized stuff, it doesn't really matter if you use black and white. But if you're trying to keep things a little bit more realistic, you probably want to use like these dark, dark, dark grays, and maybe the just close to as light as it can go, right? But that'll keep you kind of within the limits there at least, and uh, you won't be completely blown out basically. And so now you can go through and start detailing though. This is, at least in my opinion, this is the most fun right here. This is what I like to do the most. And so you can add additional details. Another side note, before you start doing all this, when you start with that initial silhouette and you decide on your 5 silhouettes you want to use, take them up in size. Okay. So that way you can, if you start working on this stuff, you'll know for a fact, like, um, you're going to do like an illustration of it basically. This is more or less a quick kind of illustration technique, if you would. And so we can just keep working on it. And this is where you slow down, right? So this is the time you just kind of take it easy and just start figuring out like what's working, what's not working. You can use the marker, you can use the other brushes, you can just have a lot of fun here, play with the tones, and see what you can get going. So if you want to add highlights, add a little bit of highlight. Or actually, this is kind of like generic shading in general. Um, you can think of these as like the shading highlights, perhaps, but at some point you have to do maybe like specular highlights as well, which would be like reflections or like exposed metallic pieces, things like that. So you might start doing those a little bit later. When things are kind of out of whack like this big blurry section here, you have options here as well. Like we could go back through this and try to maybe just fix it with the shading perhaps, which is a possibility. It's not, you add detail here, it's just going to be color at that point, right? So you could do this, no problems, and fix it with a little bit of shading. Use the blur tool. The marker by default has a little texture on it, so it's kind of nice. And then yeah, you can see we can kind of fix that little discrepancy just a tiny little bit, which is nice. But we could also go on a new layer and we could just keep working on top of this and literally painting and doing manual artwork here again, right? As opposed to trying to rely so heavily off that photograph. And so this is where it gets kind of fun, in my opinion, because it's just you're able to change things and add little details and cut things up, sharpen them, change the lines a little bit if you needed to, things like that. And you can see how fast this starts to become a thing. And then, you're working between the black and the white, so you can add a little bit of highlights in areas, uh, doing things like this. It's nice to have nice, clean brush strokes doing this, though, and not making everything super, super sketchy, anyways. So, like, I don't like that part there. I'm just going to use the brush I have for now to erase it, but I'm going to use it very heavy, so it's more solid. But generally, you want it like pure solid, if possible. It's not good to create like a feathered effect on those edges sometimes. Especially if you're going to like to do things like print. Print in general, if you feather edges, you have to do just you have to make the image. I forgot the name of it, halftones, and that's a little bit of a problem. So you got to half tone out a fade or whatever, and it's annoying. If you had it as a solid cut, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. But anyways, that's a different topic entirely. We're not at that point. So we gotta use black and white still. Oh, we're on the silhouette. We need to go on the shading. I believe white works on the silhouette too. So if you were using white, yeah, see, it doesn't matter what the color is as long as it's solid or transparent. That's all it cares about. Yeah. And so keep that in mind. If you want to add a little bit of wear or highlight, edge highlight, you can do that. Careful with that one. It's probably better to do that later, not necessarily right now. Like you can do a little bit here, but if you want to add like the specularity of like exposed metal and stuff, that's actually kind of if to do it a really simple way or kind of an easy way is that you take like your base image when you're done and then you duplicate it and then or basically you take the base image and then below it you put like metal texture and then you can do erase or mask out the edges and you can add have the metal texture underneath it, but then you have like a drop shadow on your base, basically. A little process to that, but you can add a little bit of curvature to things. It'll make it look more believable as well as a three-dimensional piece, as opposed to just as a bunch of shapes on a with some texture on them. And you can see how complicated that little section got. That's pretty wild. I'm trying to knock some of this back. I don't mind knocking things all the way back down into black as long as it's like a line, like a panel line or something. But that may or may not be what you want to do either. So judgment call on your behalf on whether you want this to be more photorealistic or sketchy like. Personally, I like the sketchy look, but that's just me maybe. All right, so we're gonna go through this one a little bit more, try to define some things here. We're gonna head back to the marker on this one, I think. So we can knock this section in right there. You see, so we can do things like that. If we want to blur things later, we can. If we want to fix the texture in that area as well, we can always go to that texture layer, maybe do like a marker color sample and just kind of work that back out on the layer itself. And then manually tweak it a little bit, perhaps. You can work on both of these at the same time, basically. See if I use white here, it doesn't work out too well. You want to use a little bit of color on the texture itself. So, but you might have to tweak some of the brightness values, is what I'm getting at. And that works out quite well. So we'll go back to the shading, do some more dark gray and light. Okay. And let's just go for it now. Let's just try to get through this as fast as possible and pick up a little bit of speed here. So we're not watching a video all day and you guys can go off and create whatever you want to create. You won't need me no more, right? So won't need to be talking in a video at least. So for any of that. Jump on the Discord though, if you want to hang out and kind of show off some designs and stuff. If you want to join that, it's on the website, of course. And you can click the little link and join the Discord. Get some more 3D modelers in there. It'd be nice. It's oh, there we go. That one I might work out later on and just make it more of a solid piece. Who knows? You don't have to trace every edge, every line, but could do it right now. Use a smudger to fix some things, perhaps if they are a problem. And overall, I think we're doing okay on this one. We're not going to do all of these, obviously. We're just going to keep going with that main one there, but you would be able to go through all of these kind of at the same time, just working from one to the next and not thinking about things too much, hopefully. So let's go to the marker. I think this here is the shading. Yeah, the shading's doing that. So we can kind of correct it a little bit, maybe. You can do little strips if you want like that. It's not going to hurt nothing. But if you want to get rid of them, you just blur it and work it out to more of a flat area anyways. Okay, and so that works there. Let's go ahead and keep going. The square tip marker works really well, even as a sketcher. Okay, so you could take this thing and just go around and make little adjustments all over the place. Not a big deal. And you do a lot of shading this way. And you can sketch with it. The square tip marker is awesome. That's like one of my favorite tools. Just can't color sample. That's all you can't do really. It's color sample because you'll get the colors as opposed to the tones. There might be a way to change that behavior, but I'm not real sure. So we'll kind of not deal with that here for now. You see how all this is trying to drop below? Maybe we change that silhouette. Maybe it would look better if we actually kind of ran this to a point where that was exposed, maybe? Maybe not, because it's kind of cut off there for some reason. I don't know what's happening there. Yeah, we could have maybe almost got away with that, having that big like bolt section in there. Since we don't have it, we would have to more or less kind of fill in the gaps here with our own imagination. But I also might not have it shaded here, so let's try shading it here and see how that works out real quick. So we'll just try to match the tones here by just using whatever we think's correct. So, oh, we might actually have the possibility of doing that. Hey, there we go. I like that. Okay, let's take that and go back to shading. Whoops, wrong one. Run all that forward a little bit. Use the grays to their full extent, I guess. And then, yeah, that works out quite well. I like that. So we can blur it to kind of even it up a bit in that area. And we can go through and fix that edge later on if needed. Let's use the airbrush, try to pop all this forward a little bit real quick. You can use a lasso too, if you want to use lasso for a bit and just go through and use that to kind of mask out little sections. It's extremely useful and effective. You see, we brought that up quite a bit. We can go with black on the bottom side, maybe. If we wanted to round that out, make it a little bit more curvy looking. It's a possibility. Okay. And so, yeah, just great ways of working all around. It's just, it's a lot of fun. It's very much about just artistry, in my opinion, to do this because you're at control of all the different tools basically, and so whatever you choose is what ends up happening for the most part. You know, that image as well. Oops, let's use different tone here. You can color sample and then desaturate if you want to try doing that. That might help you out as well. Doing little areas like that possibly. You can see some things like this as well. Like it doesn't make sense to have it do that necessarily. So if we were to take this and just start um, filling it in instead of having that break up there like that, that might look a little bit better for this area. Okay, now we can go a little bit brighter. This is angle sensitive as well, like depending on how you're holding your pen, and so you want to line up the angles as well. Yeah, there you go. Look, so it looks like a wrap almost. And because of that reason, it would probably have depth to it. So you shade in here as well. That's kind of where this all goes. It's just a lot of fun ultimately. And that texture there. Maybe I just want to see what I can do here to get rid of that. You can see that's not working out. Yeah, I'm just going to color that in and remove some of that texture. So you can smooth things out too if you want to just kind of go through and work them out a little bit. You see how that works out. Also, a great way of adding wear, like a faded effect. You see, you do just that on the texture section. Anyways, let's keep going. Shading. And this is just a small little example. So if you're doing like a big mech or you're doing some kind of spaceship or whatever, you can spend some time on it, no doubt, trying to get all the rendering to look just right, doing some photo bashing, and among other things. So eventually you can add like glow effects and stuff if it needs to light up or whatever. A lot of stuff you can still do on this too, but we'll just keep it rough real quick. And we haven't changed a whole lot here, to be honest. It would be nice to slow down a little bit and then just really think about what you're trying to create and changing the textures as well in certain areas. Like only a certain part of this might use this texture, and then you might change the texture somewhere else. So you have like two different maybe materials or two different design ideas going. Because you might want to do like big panel sections and then have like this more mechanical or rusted section doing things like that, right? So You see that that one would be nice if we just faded in and out like that. Okay, so yeah, once again, ultimately the design choices are always going to be yours. So what I want to do here is I'm going to take this and select right through there and then select this whole area. Because all I want to do is use a um, soft round brush, not the smugger, soft round brush. I want to use it very lightly in this area, like once, make it smaller, twice. Okay, so this is kind of an old school texturing technique. Make it a little bit smaller. You see? And now you can start doing things like that too if you needed to. You see it went across my little piece here. So I'm going to color sample, turn it gray, a little bit brighter, see if that will go away a little bit. Okay, and it did. This one would probably do something similar, but it would be a little bit lower, I think, because should be popping out a little bit here at the bottom, unless it was completely flat. But and then now we can just think like we want to highlight some of this stuff in here as well. All right, cool. So we could add bounce lighting. Perhaps it would probably bounce off of this, so it'd probably be closer to that color. So your texture itself, you might actually add color in here as well. You can think of that as like a texture color layer, if you would. That's probably the easiest way to look at it. Um, but you might do something like that, and then go back to the shading, and you'll get in the habit of this at some point where like you're able to just basically go through and start identifying things that need to be changed all over the place. Um, And in this case, we're just going to lighten the shading here at the bottom a little bit, a little bounce lighting perhaps. We can blend that or blur it if needed. I'm going to blur it a little bit just so it's a little softer of an effect. But nonetheless, there we go. All right, so let's do one more layer where we're just going to go over it. I like to line things afterwards anyways, just to kind of add a little bit of contrast where you can see kind of details that maybe are a little bit more important perhaps, but not so much photographic, photorealistic stuff. You can also change silhouettes a little bit with those lines if needed. You can add line weights, do fun stuff like that. So try to brighten some things as well. But basically, you can go with like a really light, maybe like a light yellow or light blue, depends on your lighting. But you can go through and you can use a really small brush with a really light, slightly colored, white, basically like an off white. And then so you can add specularity to things in this manner. This brush happens to work really well for this because it's technically rotating, and in one direction it doesn't draw. And so when you're doing these little like back and forth scribbly marks, sometimes it just doesn't actually draw, or it draws really so thin that you can't really see it. So it's perfect for this kind of stuff, but it's going to be on you if you use that one or not. These are just things to think about though. Like there's a ton of techniques you can utilize when it comes to illustration. Okay. This is just happens to be one of my favorites. Even if I wasn't going to use the photo part of this, I would probably do a lot of the shading the same way. And so it's just something to think about when you're working on something like this, anyways, to use this in this manner. You could start with a photo bash where you don't really do any drawing at first, and you just start stilling things from photos, or putting photos in and then working them. Like right here, this could probably be cut in and turned flat. That would be nice. So it has more of that look there. We're kind of messing it up basically. So I'm going to go back to the brush real quick. Anytime you find an error or something you don't like, change it real quick. I'm going to push it in a little bit if I can in this area. You see that shading's a little odd. Oh, it's not exactly like a regular cap either. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, so we'll do right to there, down like that. We'll make that a weird odd shape there real quick. Okay, something like that maybe. All right, and now we can go back over it and just shade it a little bit more appropriately. I gotta use that brush for this one, I think. Maybe this one. All right, you see where that's going. I just want to add a little separation between these two. All right, so we can go back to that scratch layer. Go back to that tool. We didn't hopefully reset it too much. I think I tried to reset it maybe. All right, yeah, no, we can do this. We can add little tiny edge wears on this, perhaps. We can add a little bit more contrast as well. And just make some like final corrections with this layer, more or less, is what you're doing. Add dirt, grunge if you need to. Whatever you really got to do here, you can do. Bring that back out so it's bigger. There you go. All right. This can also get like a little wear right here. You see? Just those little nice little markings you can add, right? Like just that final little touch to it. Don't do it, overdo it, but you can do it. All right. You can add scratches on the surface as well if you want. Like you want to add little scratches in here, little nicks, some damage. You can do it either in a lighter color or a darker color, perhaps. You can do light with dark, so you can make them look a little bit deeper, creating some shadow in there, right? And it's just a little nice touch that you do at the very end there, basically. We have definitely a long way to go on this one, though. If we were going to do the whole thing, obviously, like we have a lot of little areas we could potentially work and try to work out, anyways. I'm just going to sketch over it real quick and not think about it too much, but you can also just straight paint over things as well. Like if you don't want to go back and mess with the other layers, that's a possibility. Sometimes it's fun to do that and just collapse everything and then just keep building on whatever it is and seeing where you can go with it. So, because paint overs are a lot easier to deal with, in my opinion, but it's definitely something. Just it's not for everyone, at least, right? All right, so I said we are going to speed this up some time ago. Let's just get through it now. So it's supposed to be a quick video. I ended up spending too much time on it, but that tends to happen sometimes. I'll have a plan. I'm going to do like a quick little demo in 5 to 10 minutes or something, and it ends up running on a lot longer. But if you did enjoy the video, at least leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff. Jump on the Discord, as I said earlier, and have a little bit of fun trying to explore design ideas with each other if you want, where you get some feedback from other people as well. And we'll see how this works. Not sure what that thing does right there exactly. Like that shape. It's not a. It's not really a bolt, is it? I don't know. It's something different. I'll have to look that one up. I'm curious now. If you know the answer, leave a comment. All right. Tell me what that thing is. I just wanted to fix that edge a little bit. It was driving me nuts. Your OCD might kick in as well. And you can spend some time on this. Like it's not always going to be possible to just kick it out super fast, especially the first time you do this. As you start getting more into it, you start doing more of these projects like this. It's definitely going to speed up, but it's just not that first time. It's just not that fast. Let's be honest. And so let's add some more highlights. Go with the light blue again. We'll do some little highlights in here. Oh, let's do this one actually. I was enjoying doing it with this. So this is more of a graphic-y kind of look. And so you'd have to determine where your light sources are and where your specular highlights would be and all that fun stuff. But basically, it's pretty fast ultimately, and it's up to you to make everything pop really, right? Let's do a bunch of hard, dark lines for now since I'm not going to achieve photorealism, I think, in a short video. It'd take me like a little bit to really work this thing together and get it just nice. Like you can't do photorealism, by the way, but with like a noisy airbrush, it works out quite well. Remember that density on your brushes. When you turn it down, it creates noise, is what it does for some reason. Um, and then that will give you a noisy airbrush if you want to use it that way, but it's going to be very noisy, just so you know. I'm going to make this pop out a little bit further. Right? You can see, you can start making changes if you need to. It's really not a big deal. You want to start coloring in some of these areas, you can do that. Take a highlight, work with that highlight color, right? Maybe add a little bit of edge wear here. Use a little bit of white to add a little kind of specular sections, perhaps, just tiny little bit of it. Oops, that's a little too bright. But anyways, and then we can use black as well. Go down to like a single pixel, very lightly do that one. That'll give us a little bit of like a chipped up look. I don't know if that's even realistic on that. It should be dented, right? If it's some kind of metal, but I think you get the idea. All right, let's just line some things real quick. Big bold lines. So let me get this video finished and call it a day on this one, anyways. Yeah. So how long you want to work on this is up to you. If you're not doing it, oh, we could alpha lock the lines as well if we wanted to. Sometimes it's not worth it. You can add additional elements later on, like um, if you want to add like a little section down here that does something like that. It has like an antenna or something. I don't know. Maybe another little button on it or something. I don't know. You can add things to your designs on on layers at least that aren't alpha locked, right? Otherwise, you got to change that silhouette each time. That becomes annoying. So paint overs, like I was saying, are easier to deal with. But yeah, for the most part, I think we have the vast majority of this kind of going, starting to make sense at least. We could definitely add more detail. It could make this stuff so complicated, it becomes hard to model. So try to keep it simpler. Try to work some of these paneling pieces back so you don't have as many like sub shapes and just things you might have to model in higher and higher detail. I'm trying to find ways to um, save effort, basically. What's going on in here? Mm, It's a little too dark, isn't it? Let's take the marker to that top layer and we'll just eyeball this one. Try to work it out a little bit. Because I didn't like what was going on in there. So you can paint over, like I was saying. It's not uncommon that you're going to have to do stuff like that, possibly. You do lose your texture, though, so you got to be careful. Okay. You might have to clone stamp some new texture out, perhaps. And we'll go with some highlights. You can also change your brush blend mode if you think that would work out for you. Or you could do like a soft light here at the very end. See what I'm saying? So you can just take things up a little bit, perhaps. Just kind of work them rather quickly in certain areas. Also, take note of the bolts here. You want to make sure when you're doing details that bolts don't just go straight up and down like that. That's not very realistic. They'd probably go around the surface like this, right? So you'd probably have to rearrange those and maybe get rid of these things a little bit later on, perhaps. Let's do it. And then take that color and add it to the edge on there. All right, for now. Yeah, like things like that, obviously, right? Color sample a lot, and you'll have a little bit of a better time with that process, anyways. Maybe we don't want a seam there like that. Okay, and so, oop, what did I do to my brush? What happened there? I made it super small by accident. All right. And if we blend that, it might be a little fuzzy. Yeah. Can always, these layers as well, you could try dropping the opacity a tiny bit. It might help, but I don't know about that one on this one. So, texture brushes, if you have them, can also be quite useful. Krita comes with some decent like splatter brushes, by the way. You splatter things like super fast. And so looking for one there's like a crackly one that's kind of fun. Clouds. These are all fun to use and a little bubbly one. Okay, we'll use this one. And we'll do this on a new layer. We're going to alpha lock it. But on top of alpha locking it, we could use lassos as well. So like maybe this section gets like a really big splatter effect across it. And we could do something like maybe like a bright yellow, splatter it, and then this layer we could just set it to something like overlay. You see, so we can create some cool texture patterns as well. If you're going to do like more organic stuff, this is just something you might do. Just do some overlays basically. And but you could do that across the whole thing perhaps if you wanted. We'll just work this one area for now. And then maybe this back section, we won't overdo it. And so it's on a new layer as well. So it means basically if I'm gonna make it more yellow. But basically that's kind of interesting because I think it makes it look more like a dirty composite, like a plastic or something perhaps. So maybe we do it at the front as well. I kind of like that idea. I'll do it only in these kind of areas like this maybe. And turn it a little bit more orange perhaps. And okay, and then let's do it down here in this area. All right, so yep, there you go. That's it in a nutshell, right? You can make these things happen. Super simple. You can do this on little pieces and parts like this, and then later on you can collapse it, and you can layer. Well, I don't know if I would do that actually. Um, it's probably better to build an image entirely and then start layering textures on and playing with the shading and stuff like that, perhaps. But if you wanted to, you could take these and then kind of slap them together as little parts and components to create like big mechs and stuff. So you can do these little elements all over the place. You'll end up with really cool stuff, basically. And then, they're kind of random in nature, and so, but they're also very deliberate as well, depending on what you're doing, because like the overlay of the texture makes it a lot more random. So, this is kind of how stuff like that was always created. And then AI came along. People are doing, well, but AI basically does that now, right? So, but people have been doing this kind of stuff for a while. It's always had that kind of look to it, but they refine it usually is what they do. And so people are taking AI images and now and refining them. And I do that too. It's quite fun. You could do a sketch first, shade it, and then have AI kind of fill in the gaps and see what comes out. But let's see. We're going to go back to the digital set real quick. I just want to use a sketcher or always I call everything sketchers, but basically this one here or a hard round brush like that at least. Okay. On a new layer outside of this real quick. Okay. And the reason for that is I just want to see if like you took like an idea like this is going to be some kind of mechanical leg at some point, and it has like some kind of weird big bracket out here that connects these things together. We'll just kind of keep going with the idea of these like brackets like that. Maybe this is like some kind of joint here at some point. You see what I'm saying? This is how you start designing like your whole mech basically. So you would have possibly through here. Maybe you could try doing this. I don't know if it would work or function correctly, but I'd have to play with a block out, I think, on this one because it's kind of narrow in there, and I might want to open that up and change the angles perhaps. And doesn't look very um, it doesn't look very secure, I would say. Like looks a little fragile or something. But basically, if you wanted to create like hydraulics in kind of different areas, perhaps you might get away with something like this, right? Where you kind of create like these bases to them, and then you work them out, and then you'd have eventually. I got like the wrong angle there on that. Let's try and change that a bit. Maybe you do something like this at some point. Create those hydraulic pieces, air shocks, hydraulics, whatever, something in there. A pneumatic or a hydraulic system. So, because that's a silhouette, you already know what that means, right? A quick clipping group, boom. And we can work on that as a separate piece, perhaps. We don't have to throw it all together in one giant section. And so this is where you start adding complexity because now you're basically at the point where you're like, hey, I can make um, complex complex parts and pieces and all kinds of stuff relatively quick and then add to them and make them extremely complex before you know it. But you can break this down later on so you can separate all your different pieces and model. If you're going to model this stuff, you don't have to have everything in the way of one another. You can just kind of start moving them around. And that's a huge benefit of doing your own concepts. You can layer them basically, right? Trying to find something online and use it as a reference. It might not be like that. So I'm just going to use a bright blue like that. So we can make this like more silver perhaps if we wanted more reflective looking. Probably take my time and make that look a little bit nicer, but we'll be all right. I figured the blue would look good here, at least, like the silvery blue, because the front's kind of blue too, right? That'd be kind of fun. And of course, it would have bounce lighting on it, possibly. A different little, different little things going on in there, perhaps like little. You see, so you can hand paint this stuff pretty quick. It's not always about just using images. You can combine them. You could throw an image on top of this, but you're probably better off just using texture, to be honest. Like a texture brush. You can make your own. Get a little collection of them going at least. I don't want that one too bright right there. And I think I'm going to add a little highlight there. And that will be that right there. I think we have done enough in this video, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here, even though I've been trying to end it for a while. But you can get carried away on this stuff, obviously, right? And so, one last touch. One more thing, right? We'll just fill this area in on a layer below it real quick, just so, it doesn't stand out quite as much. But definitely take our time and shade that a little bit more and, really just get it kind of going exactly the way we want it, basically. Work it all together. Okay. So, anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. I'll check you out in the next one. All right. Take care.